All right, welcome back, everybody. Thursday edition of the Brick Wall. It's episode number 58. Before we get started, I have to say that next week I'll be taking the week off, but we have an exciting preview for the upcoming week after that. But today, guest for episode number 58 is Alan Holcomb, who is of Turnbull, Cain, and Holcomb. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Warren. Appreciate it.
So I start off by asking everyone where they are because we're all, globally affected by this. Where are you at the moment?
I'd like to have some type of cool answer for you, but I'm just in the office.
Yeah.
We worked at home for a couple months, and then now we've basically just been back in the office, kind of rotating in and out, making sure everybody's safe. But yeah, just in the office.
So you're in Georgia, huh?
Yeah, so we're in Atlanta, Georgia. Our office is in Buckhead, which is kind of like the financial district. It's about 20 minutes north of downtown. So yeah, just a office building here next to the W Hotel.
Very cool. So again, I appreciate you joining me. I was excited and I'm looking forward to talking to you. I want to we'll dig into your legal career, how you got started. I know that, you used to, defend some large institutions, and now you're on the plaintiff side. And, about a month ago, I had my cousin on who's, big in the vaping community in Arizona. So, I love him. I love you, Matt, but we're going to probably talk about some of the poisonous harm that Juul and other things that, that stuff does to you as well. So I want to get into all that. But so let's rewind all the way. Graduate college. How'd you get started in law? Why law?
It's interesting. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I was kind of like, I played sports and stuff like that in high school, but I was kind of the dorky kid who liked watching C-SPAN and, reading the newspaper and watching CNN and that type of stuff. So I knew I wanted to go into law. I specifically even knew I really wanted to be a trial lawyer. I, kind of grew up watching Matlock and, The Firm and some of those, Time to Kill, some of those trial lawyer movies. And so I knew that's what I wanted to do, even going into college. So that was the goal the whole time. And then once I got to college, I kind of met this new group of friends who were just so happened to kind of be on the same path. And so it was really a no-brainer. It's funny, you talk to a lot of lawyers, and it's a stressful profession. And you talk to other guys, and they're like, man, I wish I had gone into finance, or I wish I had done this or that. It can be stressful at times, but there's really nothing else that I'm really interested in or would want to do. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me.
That's interesting because I know I meandered my way through college, and then I figured out what I wanted to do, worked in government, and then did this and that. And I've had many of my dad's colleagues and friends up in New York who are attorneys tell me, stay away. So to hear someone who wanted to do it from a young age and passionate about it and still passionate about it, is awesome to hear. And obviously it shows with, where you've come with, along with your career. What inspired you to, I know like you were, well, why don't we get into your career? I know we just did law school. And so tell us like your early career, when you were defending big insurance companies and so on.
Yeah, so I graduated from the University of Georgia, and then I graduated law school from Emory University here in Atlanta. I grew up in a small town outside of Atlanta called Snellville, where the motto is where everybody's somebody. So in law school, I started interning at a major defense firm here in the city named Weinberg Wheeler. And they're based out of Atlanta. It's a larger law firm, close to 100 attorneys, and they practice all over the country. And their main kind of selling point on the defense side is we'll take the worst cases that the insurance company has, so the best cases from a plaintiff's perspective, and we'll try them for you, or we'll try to get a resolution in these really tough kind of big bad cases. So I started there. I did 2 summer internships there. Really liked the culture there. I was really close with some of the older attorneys kind of going into it. And then I started there straight out of law school.
That's awesome. And and then you made the switch, to the other side, to the plaintiff side. Like, why personal injury?
Yeah, so I did that for about 10 years. I was I eventually made shareholder and then partner at that firm. And I got really lucky to kind of fall in with some older guys who all they did was drop in late to these kind of bigger cases and triumph the verdict. And so I got a lot of, amazing experience. I mean, it was stressful, but it was awesome. It was kind of a dream come true, dropping in at the last second, trying cases in Iowa and California, cases up in Baltimore, just kind of all over the place. And I kind of knew the whole time that I eventually would probably make a switch to the plaintiff side. So where I was working before, it was all basically large corporations and large insurance companies, and a little bit of plaintiff's work on the side here or there. But I kind of knew I was going to head in that direction. I had really learned a lot from the plaintiff's lawyers that I seen all across the nation. And I kind of hit this point in my career where it wasn't that I was bored, so to speak. I still loved the firm. I still love the firm. I still love the people that are there. It just got to a point where I was ready for a new challenge. And then, through the course of all these cases, I was finding myself getting closer and closer to the injured parties. So not that I would, I obviously was representing my client zealously and not crossing any lines or anything, but I started to gain more respect for the people I was going against. And I started to really want to know the human story behind these people I was frankly adverse to. And one kind of big turning point for me was we tried a really tragic case in California back in 2015. And it was a really, really tough case on both sides, back and forth across the country all the time, very hard fought. And we ended up getting a defense verdict. And I had kind of gotten not close to, but I had some empathy for the plaintiff, the injured party. He had a severe lung disease, was clearly going to die at some point from it. And we ended up getting a defense verdict. They asked for $75 million or something like that in closing, got a defense verdict. And I remember looking at the family in the corner, and they were devastated. And not really because they lost a lawsuit and wouldn't be getting money, but you could just really tell it was kind of it was all the pressure, all the years of the sickness and everything together. And it was kind of at that moment where I was like, you know what? I love the people here. I love my job, and I do, and I did. But that's what I want to do. I want to be the guy on the other side fighting the companies and trying to help these people whose lives have clearly just been devastated.
So, I mean, what's that like, right? I mean, you're the guy on one side, just like a perfect example is, prosecutor, someone in an ADA, who's, been, prosecuting people for a long time, and then they, pop out into the criminal defense world, and, they know how to pick apart cases. They know the system, they know the arguments from the other side. So, you're better at playing ping pong on the other side of the table. Do you think it's applicable, here as well?
Yeah, I think so. The good thing about the firm that I was at, they knew that was my passion. When I left, I don't think it was any great surprise to anyone that I was going to switch sides. And so they let me dabble a little bit. And so I kind of got to know the game of it, so to speak, from the plaintiff side. And then the guy who I've partnered up with, Brett Turnbull, who you've had on the show before, he's been a plaintiff's lawyer, injury lawyer his entire career. So it's kind of a weird spot. I'm a decade into practice, and I felt like my experience was way beyond that. But you're kind of starting anew. But the good thing is I have a guy like Brett who's tried cases, has a very similar background to me, but on the plaintiff side, and has done it all across the nation. And so, I've been able to kind of learn from him some of the tricks of the trade on the plaintiff side. But, you're learning. It's an everyday learning experience, just like when you're a defense lawyer.
I mean, when you were on the other side and you were a defense lawyer, were you always like, oh, those personal injury guys or those plaintiffs lawyers, and how do you adapt in becoming one of them if they're always the nemesis?
I really wasn't. I was not one of these jaded defense lawyers who thought that plaintiffs lawyers were bloodsuckers only out for money. I think it's because of the type of cases that we were working on. If my prior firm got the case, for the most part, somebody had made a big mistake, and somebody was really injured or had passed away. And so the cases we were dealing with were very serious. And so I never really had this mentality of us versus them. I never really had this mentality of they're trying to game the system. And I think that's kind of been one of the biggest surprises to me since I made the jump, now that I've gotten to know more plaintiffs lawyers, is that I don't really think that stereotype is a true one. I mean, I guess people say, well, they're called stereotypes because there must be some truth to them. But the vast majority of the plaintiffs lawyers who I've gotten to know since I switched sides and joined up with Brett, they're not in it solely, for the money. I mean, they got to feed their families, but they truly care about their clients. Their interests are aligned. The better that the lawyer does, the better the client does. The better the client does, the better the lawyer does. And so, yeah, I never really had that mentality.
So why do folks hate on personal injury lawyers so much, and why is there that stereotype if it's it's success based, there's alignment? Why do you think, again, being on both sides, I think you have a more interesting perspective than others who've only been on the plaintiff side. Why that hate?
I think I think it's mostly propaganda that's been put out by insurance companies and large corporations over the last 30 years. And it kind of falls into this whole tort reform aspect. It's this idea of the greedy plaintiffs lawyers, of the McDonald's coffee cup case, of one call that's all, of that type of thing. That's been disseminated all throughout media for the last 30 years. And it's frankly became just part of the culture. And I think the plaintiffs bar does a better job of it today of fighting that stereotype and trying to show the human aspect of it. But back in the 90s, late 80s, I'm not sure that they had a really good answer to that. I think that's truly why it is. I think it's mostly propaganda and just a media push from insurance companies.
And are those insurance companies and the big corporations that you guys are going up against now that you're on this side, if they're not spending money on propaganda against plaintiffs' attorneys and victims, they're spending money on lobbying state legislatures, they're spending money lobbying DC, and I think that they've driven up the cost of a lot of things as well.
Yeah, listen, this is what I tell people, because I've been on both sides of it with the insurance companies, and I knew there are some insurance companies out there who truly do act in the best interest of their insured. And I have friends in the insurance industry. I have a lot of friends. Some of my best friends in the world are still defense lawyers. Actually, most of my best friends are still defense lawyers. And I have lifelong friends who I've made in the insurance industry. So here's the truth of it. These companies have gotten so big, they've lost the human aspect of it, of what insurance is supposed to be. It's supposed to protect you if you get injured, and to make sure basically that your life doesn't fall apart. And in exchange for that, they get premiums. The truth of most insurance companies, and I mean the vast majority, and maybe all of them, is that even if they know that they or their insured committed a wrong that hurt or killed someone, if they could, they would pay $0 for that case. That's the truth. There's really no morality to it anymore with that. So yeah, it's kind of a funny thing. I get some defense lawyers who will call me and say, well, my client wants to do the right thing. And I appreciate the sentiment, but I know that if they could, they would pay nothing.
So, I mean, so getting, does a strong worded letter work? Does evidence work? Or, or do you oftentimes, like when they're trying to, sit at zero, is trial the answer?
Obviously, if you can try to resolve a case before you get to trial, that's what you want to do. It's usually, it's if you get the right number, something that's a fair number for your client to make up for the harms and the losses, that's what you would want to do. You want to avoid the trial for the client's sake. Believe me, the trial is not a fun experience for the clients on either side, frankly. And so that's usually the best resolution. But the way that you get to a number in settlement that's fair to your client and reasonable to both sides is the threat of trial. I mean, the mechanism that we have in the civil justice system is to have a trial where a judge, the jury, and then the judge enters the order for the verdict, and then they have to pay it. So the main pressure point, the main motivator for insurance companies, some of these bigger corporations, to settle a case is, hey, I think I can pay less now, and if I get into a courtroom and I wait another year or two, I have to pay my defense attorneys, and then there's a decent shot, maybe a probability, more likely than not, that I get into the courtroom and the plaintiffs are going to get a verdict higher than what I can settle for right now. And so a big part of the toolbox for a plaintiff's lawyer is a history of trying cases, the ability to try cases, and the willingness to do it. If that's going to be your main pressure point, if that's going to be your main tool in your toolbox, it has to be a credible threat.
I mean, that's a great answer. And how about, on the plaintiff side, do your clients typically want to, they've already dealt with this trauma or this terrible situation, they're dealing with treatment, they're going to medical care, sometimes chemo, whatever it is, sometimes unfortunately death, and you're dealing with a family, they've already dealt with this trauma. Do they also want to avoid trial, or do most plaintiffs want to go the distance so they can get the most that they can get? Or do they just want to check and have it done with?
I have a lot of clients who it's not really even about the money to them. Some people might be cynical and say, yeah, right. Well, it's actually true. I mean, I have a lot of clients who frankly just want to be heard. Something bad happened to them and it wasn't their fault, and it was somebody else's fault who should have known better and did know better in a lot of cases. And they just kind of want to be heard. I can't think of a single client of ours that I've come across who's just dying to get into the courtroom. I mean, if they can be made whole, so, lost wages or future medical care, past medical care, the intangible kind of human losses, such as I can't take care of my special needs daughter anymore because my arm doesn't work anymore. If they can be made whole through money, which is the only mechanism that we have under our system of justice to try to make them whole, they want to do that as early as possible. Like I said, the trial is a traumatic experience for most of them. They have to relive what happened to them. They have to sit there in the courtroom while the defense lawyer either insinuates or just comes right out and says, you're a liar, or what happened to you wasn't that bad, or it's somebody else's fault, it's your own fault. So yeah, they're not dying to get into the courtroom, but if fair value is not paid, and if the defense refuses to take responsibility for what they did and what was lost, then sometimes that's the only option.
I want to switch. I want to move into the Juul and vaping, because I know you've worked on both sides there as well. And there are not many people who, there are not many people who have expertise like that you have, as far as that, because again, an auto accident, airplane accident, something where there's clear negligence, it can be proven. We all know Juul had their marketing campaign, and they try to avoid teens, preteens, but that's full of baloney. And now the government has their own ads, anti-Juul, and the little Juul in the mini coffin. everyone's gotten creative on both sides. So tell us a little bit about the safety or lack thereof of vaping products. And again, I'm sorry to my cousin Matt. And then I want to get into how you prove liability there, because I unlike collision, there's so much unknown with Juul and other vaping products. That I'm sure it's harder to prove liability, but let's dig in.
Yeah. So as people might know, so Juul obviously is this electronic cigarette, which essentially became a substitute for traditional combustion cigarettes. The main problem with Juul, just to kind of cut to the chase, is that they market to the vulnerable population. Now they may say we try to avoid the kids. Well, the fact of the matter is they made a product that has a bunch of different flavors that are attractive to teens, preteens. They have a product that looks like a USB port and that was made in part to be able to hide it from your parents and be able to use it at school. Now, as far as like the health effects of it, the main part that I've been focusing on is really the toxic substances that are either in the Juul or are created from the vapor, from the smoke of the Juul. So a large part of my career on the defense side was handling mass tort product liability cases. And I handled hundreds of cases and tried a few cases dealing with a specific chemical called diacetyl, and it causes a lung disease called popcorn lung, which the medical term is bronchiolitis obliterans. And there's been thousands of these cases since 2000 of microwave popcorn workers getting sick in factories, mostly, like I said, popcorn factories, from mixing diacetyl and some other similar substances into vats. And what some studies have recently shown, some scientific studies, and I'm not just making this stuff up, is they sampled, I can't remember exactly which journal it was right now, but they sampled, I want to say 75, 100 of these different Juul e-cigarette products, which we believe some of them included Juul. And they basically took the smoke that was emitted from the e-cigarette and reverse engineered it to see what was in the smoke, what was actually going to be inhaled into the user's lungs. And what they found was the vast majority of these products had in the smoke, in the emissions, diacetyl and then a similar compound called 2,3-pentane-dione. And this was despite some of these manufacturers actually representing to the researchers and to the public that their products didn't contain diacetyl. I mean, it's been pretty widely known over the last 15 years or so that diacetyl is very dangerous when it's inhaled, especially when it's heated. And the problem with Juul here is you have a product that is meant to be heated at the user's lips and inhaled directly into the lungs. I mean, microwave popcorn manufacturers like Conagra and some other ones have spent God knows how much money taking diacetyl out of microwave popcorn for this very reason. And instead, what we have here is an industry that is essentially unregulated, and they've kind of recreated the problem. The same problem that we had in microwave popcorn factories, and a lot of the same problems that we had in the 80s, 90s, going back to the 50s with tobacco companies. I mean, that's kind of the frustrating thing from a regulatory perspective from some of the scientists, doctors I talked to, is they kind of feel like they had this epidemic of cigarette smoking under control. I mean, the numbers have been dropping of people smoking. I mean, if you look back 5-10 years ago, especially after they banned smoking in most restaurants and bars, it was pretty tough to find people smoking in public. And along came Juul, and they purposely took out the throat hit that people are turned off to with tobacco cigarettes. They purposely made it where you don't have that smell, the cigarette smell. And so it really, and what we've seen since then is an epidemic of young people using this stuff. And, as some of your viewers might know, we've seen some people get pretty severely injured in the last year.
That's, it's terrible. And not, again, you're talking about the popcorn industry, and that's isolated to the factory workers, not that, their lives matter. And that's, a big deal. And obviously you've worked on that side of things, but how irresponsible to then take that a known issue to the masses and to young children, who have their entire lives ahead of them. So that's, terrible.
That's one aspect of it, but the other aspect of it is nicotine. At the end of the day, all Juul is a nicotine delivery system. Nicotine is only there to addict people. That's why they put nicotine into cigarettes back in the day. And so what we're seeing here, and what I think the bigger, other than the injury, what I think the more public health concern is that now you have millions of younger people getting addicted to nicotine at a young age, and the risk of stroke increases, the risk of heart attack increases. It changes the neurologic pathways in your brain. It's just not good.
Can the argument be made that of the bad actors in the industry, Juul, and again, I know you have cases against them, so I'm just playing devil's advocate. Could the argument be made that Juul is at least a known entity, big brand, obviously therefore a good defendant to go after, but you have all these other people who make the juices or the e-juices in vats. They're random brands. I don't know if there's one big conglomerate that sells them all. I don't think so. I think it's very fractured. But are those, is Juul at least like a little bit regulated, whereas those bad actors, it's just open market and you can buy the juice at any store and don't know what the hell's in it? Or
yeah, it's that's a good question. Listen, all of the manufacturers, even the mom and pops, they have a duty, they have a responsibility to pass along the information that they know to the consumer. But I do empathize with them to a certain extent, because Juul, which is owned by Altria, which is a major tobacco company, is 75% of the market. So I think there's a pretty good argument to be made that if Juul was more forthcoming, or if they self-regulated, or if the U.S. government did a better job of regulating this industry, then you really wouldn't have the problem of the mom and pops putting out a product that's dangerous for kids. So we have some cases that are some smaller manufacturers, and certainly I think, given what the public knowledge is and what it's been, they had a duty to pass along this information to to Joe Smith walking into the store to buy vape juice. But the 800-pound gorilla in the room is Juul. If I can go and Google and find all of the dangerous properties of the chemicals that are emitted from their product, they got teams of scientists, toxicologists. They can do the same thing, and they should do the same thing.
Yeah, when they were, I assume they were acquired. They were Pax Labs originally, right? So they were,
correct.
Yeah, and then so now they're with Altria. What do the scientists and physicians you talk to who say that they ended the epidemic of nicotine addiction, smoking? Now those big players are pivoting and getting into the market, finding loopholes. I'm sure there's plenty of lobbying dinero behind that. What's their feeling on these big companies now trying to find loopholes and getting people addicted anyway? There's no altruism in it.
They're frustrated. These scientists, they've committed their entire lives, 20 years of school or more, actually more usually after you go to fellowship and residency and all the stuff they do. A lot of these doctors, they've committed their entire lives to public health. And there's a lot of things out there that endanger the public health. Now we're seeing it with COVID. And basically what we've done is we've unleashed a new epidemic. And frankly, the cat's back out of the bag. And unless juries across the nation or the federal government, make it not worth Juul's money and time to disseminate these products, to spread them out, across the country, nothing's going to stop it. The cat's out of the bag.
It's and I mean, obviously you're on the front lines of amazing work, and again, I joke about my cousin, and he talked about the harms in it. He discussed it as being less harmful than tobacco, smoking a cigarette, but clearly still a major concern, and again, the fact that the big players are pivoting into it, and marketing the hell out of it, that what they're after.
Yeah, and I sympathize. I do sympathize with some of the more mom and pops of this. I mean, it's illegal. It's legal. There's nothing illegal about selling it. But I think until Juul is held accountable, there's no end in sight.
Yeah, and I know like some jurisdictions have, on a municipal level or on a state level, have outlawed some of the flavors, and they've done. I mean, do you think that's a step in the right direction, or do you think that that's not? We're not moving fast enough as far as shutting things down?
I think it's a step in the right direction. I mean, but for some of these lung diseases, they can take years to manifest themselves, and so for those folks, what we do now doesn't really help. So there's some, like, getting rid of some of the flavors, if they would go back through, make sure that harmful chemicals aren't emitted from the smoke, aren't included in the juice. I mean, there are certain things that we can do. And I understand the argument about, well, it's better than smoking, tobacco cigarettes. I understand that argument, but it comes with its own risks. And frankly, it's a bigger risk today than tobacco cigarettes.
I mean, I'll be honest. Like I used to smoke cigarettes but just for about a year, and I switched to vape. And the problem with vape is, unlike a cigarette, I need to go on a cigarette break. I go downstairs. I need gum. I need mouthwash. I need to put on cologne. I don't want to smell like a smoker. But with vape, you could sit at your desk. You could go to the bathroom. You could smoke it anywhere all the time. So there was something called Logic. E-cig, and I would smoke. It says 200 puffs or 400 puffs. I could finish one in a day because It was just there's no end in sight, and there's no at least that time there was no taboo around it.
Yeah, and they designed it to be like that. I mean, that's kind of the point with tobacco combustion cigarettes. At least you have the harshness on the throat. You have the smell on your clothes in the bars and restaurants. For women, they often talk about having the smell in their hair. But for e-cigarettes, you have a taste of bubble gum or whatever it might be. The smoke disappears almost instantaneously. It's made to look like it is a USB, but it's made to look like something that you need to use and plug into your laptop. And it's designed specifically for young people to use it where they won't get caught using it. I mean, if you light up a cigarette today in a library in college, they might kick you out of school.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they should, but they might do that. But these Juul e-cigarettes are designed to where you can just hide it and get away with it. And which makes it more, in my opinion, more dangerous.
And how about secondhand smoke with Juul and vape? Is that a concern? Is that something that conversations are being had about?
Yeah, some of the scientists, some of the doctors, pulmonologists who I've spoken to about this issue, that's kind of where their head is moving on these. The fact of the matter is, e-cigarettes and Juul are a pretty new phenomenon. So honestly, we don't even know the full scope of what the harm could be. And so that area hasn't really been developed, but it's certainly a risk.
I mean, and it seems obvious, right? I mean, if you're in a small room, 100 square foot room, and you got two little kids there, and you're vaping away, especially on the larger chamber, the big battery ones, and you have this beautiful cloud of smoke come out, clearly like it's dissipating, but it's going somewhere, and they're breathing that air.
Well, that's right, and it really goes back to the microwave popcorn workers in my mind. The NIOSH and some of these other public health entities would go into these places, and they would essentially measure the air hours after any work had been done, and they would still be able to detect diacetyl, other chemicals in the air. And so what we may have here is the same effect with Juul. But like I said, it's really only been around, the Juul, since about 2015, and it's a pretty new phenomenon, and we really just don't know how bad it is yet, just how bad it is.
So we're going to have to do an interview every 6 months to a year to follow up and find out, because really I'm being serious. You're at the forefront of this, and studying it, working with pulmonologists, other physicians, public health experts, and learning this. So, who better than you to have this knowledge?
Well, it was a frustrating thing for me, because I spent the company I worked for, which I'm not going to get into many details about them, but they tried to do the right thing 150%. It was a company of good people who tried to do the right thing. And once the full risks were known, they took a lot of very public steps to take it off the market, and to warn about it, and truly tried to do the right thing. And so it was frustrating for me from a defense perspective. I worked for the better part of 10 years, flew all over the country on a weekly basis, handled thousands of lawsuits related to that chemical. And I was kind of seeing that stuff in my rearview mirror. It was so widely known that this set of chemicals irritate the lungs and can cause severe lung disease. It was so well known that most companies, or a lot of companies, had taken it out of their products, and I was starting to see it in the rearview mirror. And then, lo and behold, along comes Juul in 2015, and here we are again, dealing with the same issues, the same exposures, the same lack of warnings that the microwave popcorn industry dealt with 20 years ago.
So here's your next 10 years of work.
Right.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, what other practice areas, what other plaintiffs are you guys working with?
Yeah, we, Brett and I it was a good business marriage here. He had a background and has a background in a lot of catastrophic injury plaintiffs cases, a lot of automotive product liability cases, so rollovers, brake failures. I had done some of that on the defense side, dealing with airbags and some other stuff. So our main focus is on catastrophic injury cases. Juul's one part of what we do, but it's by no means everything that we do. So we do everything from catastrophic truck wrecks, even some catastrophic car wrecks under the right circumstances, product liability, and medical malpractice. Medical malpractice is I think, a really under-recognized risk in society. And because of I think the propaganda really from the insurance industry over the last 20 or 30 years, a lot of people kind of look down on medical malpractice. But we handle a lot of that, and we do it all over the country. So we have cases. I'm licensed in Georgia, Mississippi, Ohio, California. Brett's in Texas, Alabama, Tennessee. We have other lawyers licensed in Louisiana and Florida. So we're kind of all over the place, and if it's the right type of case and it's something that we can bring some value to, then it's something that we'll handle. And if it's something that's not really in our wheelhouse, we usually can find other lawyers who have that expertise, people that we would trust with our family members, and can get folks to the right lawyers.
So what I've definitely learned today is that you guys like pain, because I know people who sit for one bar exam and then you just hop from state to state to state, taking the test over and over again.
So I took Georgia, Florida, and California in person, and California was by far the hardest. It was a 35% passage rate when I took it, and I was in the middle of my own practice, and so I only had about 2 weeks to study for it. And I had a 6-month-old child at the time who was going through a sleep regression. So it was kind of a disaster of a month. But yeah, you hit a certain, it's kind of like I told some of our other partners. They were talking about Illinois or Missouri or something. I said, listen, guys, if I can waive in and just pay the money and get in, we'll do it. But I'm not taking another bar exam.
I don't blame you.
I got 3 under my belt. I'm not taking another one.
I don't blame you. So before we wrap up for good, tell us where you guys can be found online.
Right. So Turnbull Law Firm, PC is our main hub in Birmingham, Alabama, and then I kind of handle our Atlanta, Georgia office, and that's tchlawfirm.com, and we're on Instagram, Facebook. So just type in Turnbull and Holcomb, and we should be there. Also, we're members of the Law Center, which is a pretty exciting organization. And so if you just Google the Law Center, you'll find us there as well.
Absolutely. I should have mentioned that. No, Alan, I really appreciate you joining me. Your information, everything that you're doing is awesome. And the fact that you have worked on both sides, even more interesting. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share with us.
Thanks for having me, Warren. Appreciate it.